Today I'm painting a charming European doorway with a stair entrance. What I thought would be a simple subject turned out to be more complex. The shadows and texture needed careful layering. I'll walk you through how I built up the values step by step to bring the scene to life. I first began by choosing a palette, and I'm using my wet straight out of the tube paints today. And I chose several granulating colors as usual, feeling like they would really represent the texture here. To get started, I'm going to get down those light to mid tones as our first layer and avoid any hard lines where I don't want them. And I can see in the reference photo that the shadows, things tend to blend from one color to the next inside this little entryway. So I'm not worried about sticking too closely to my line drawing. I'm just trying to lay that foundation for the colors that blend from one to the next. I will say my intention was to keep this very simple. You can see in my sketch that I haven't drawn every detail on the door, and it was never my intention to be very realistic about this, just to show kind of this welcoming little doorway. As I got into it, I realized sometimes it's harder to do something more simplified because you have to choose which things are the most important and eliminate everything else that you don't need. And as I laid down this first layer, I had every intention of just building it up in another layer or two. But what I found was that the values, in order for this to be accurate and the value story across the image, I really had to keep layering on top of, which you'll see unfold as we go. And don't get me wrong, some of the best paintings you'll do have multiple layers, and you will have that complete value story when you're done. It's just sometimes they sneak up on you, and this was the case. I really thought this image was going to be simple, and I selected it to do this little demonstration for that reason, because I love the idea of a doorway. I've painted a few for friends and family on greeting cards of their doors, and I just thought it's a great little tool to have to understand how to paint kind of an architectural feature. So once I feel like I have a good base layer of shading down, I'm going to go ahead and add the molding on the doorway. And I'm not going to try to paint every detail on it, as I just mentioned, but what I'm doing is just trying to imply enough so that the viewer knows that the door has depth and it has this molding feature on it. Take your time on this part, and I used this flat brush because I thought it would be good to get the straightness of the line, but I think I would have been better off with like a 0 or a number 2 round, just for more control, and it wouldn't be so choppy looking. I mentioned in other videos it's really important to pick a brush that is best for the stroke you're trying to make, and sometimes I think it's easy, we just continue with the one that's in our hand. So be conscious of that as you're painting, to use the right brush. Now I need to show that the panels here have depth. You could see it was very flat and just looked like these linear lines, so I need to make it a little more cohesive. So I'm trying to darken those so that they're a little more integrated with the molding. And keep in mind the molding has a bit of a stain on it, so it's not truly just a shadow, so it's okay that it's a little bit more high contrast. Now for the lantern, I really want that to pop off, so I need to do our little trick of darkening what happens behind to make the front object come forward. So I'm going around and I'm adding more depth around the actual globe. Now I wanted to add lavender to cool off this wall stucco. And it's just a matter of how much you want to add. I went kind of heavy-handed. I like that the lavender complements the yellowy brown tones I'm using. But again, I went for a little more drama, and that was intentional. I didn't want the palette to be kind of one note. So I chose this cooler tone, and I can use it to push the values on my shadows, which you can kind of see me integrating it in. Even though I don't literally see it in the reference photo per se, there is some coolness. So now I'm adding some splatters to kind of mimic what I see in the reference photo, and then I can spread those out to get a little less contrast and make the water pull out some of that pigment. So that's what I'm doing here. And really, as always, don't be a slave to your reference photo. You don't need to depict the exact spots that you see on the wall. You just need to show that there's a texture there. So I'm discovering that my, doorway is still flat. It doesn't look like it's recessed. So I'm having to go in glazing to really push it back. And here's where you have to be bold and brave and say, I'm going to paint over what I've already painted so that I can get a better result. So you'll see me building on it and more, especially in the creases here, because it's the straight against the flat with the sharp lines against the texture that really makes this believable. And even though we want it to be painterly, we still have to do our job of showing the user what's further back, what has depth and dimension. So I'll keep going over some of the same areas repeatedly. The lantern is an example, the corners, the door panels, and the stairway. And you'll see it evolve. It's getting there, but it's just not far enough. And that's where, as a painter, you just have to keep looking at it and saying, like you can see here, I'm putting in these darks thinking I'm approaching the end, but then I'll discover, nope, I need a little more, more of those mid-tones that I kind of skipped over. So essentially I went from light to dark too fast without building that up. And so now I'm paying the price because I'm having to go back in, which is fine. It's just part of the process. So you can see when I add these dark darks, it does help to define the structure of our image, and that will help you simplify things as you go. If you can pick up what are those key areas, then you can do less with more. And as you watch, you can see as I build the values up, things do start to have more dimension and feel more believable. And then once you feel like you've got there, then you can add more texture like I'm doing here with this dry brush effect. And put in some of those more final top layers. So I'm going to attempt to do this at the top the same way I did on the stairs, which I think was pretty successful. There's more contrast in the stairs than there is up in this top ceiling area. And so I think that's when I learn as I go, no, it's going to need more. And again, this is all part of the process. It's okay. It just becomes more challenging. And for this example, I really was trying to do something simple, and I think it became a lot more complex. And while I was really happy with the ending, it took a while to get there. So you can see here's where the bravery comes in. I'm having to paint over what I had laid down initially. But as long as your paper is dry, watercolor is brilliant for that. So you can go on without worry that you're going to disrupt those layers that fall underneath, and it's just going to add more depth. So I'm trying to scan across the reference photo to determine what have I missed, what did I overpaint, what did I underpaint, and where can I add to make it start to push that doorway back into that opening. And then once you adjust one thing, like I did on the door, now I realize, oh, the ceiling needs to be darker. Because they're all connected, so they all have to follow the same value story, whatever it is. Sometimes it even benefit from walking away and coming back. I didn't do that in this case. I think the entire painting took me about an hour to do. I think it was just under an hour. I wanted the line to be sharper on the separation from the front wall to the doorway. So it was just easier for me to rotate my paper and then go in again with more darks because I'm just not quite dark enough. And I'm finally starting to get there. I can see as I compare it to the reference photo on the right that it's starting to match. But again, once I've done something to one side, then I have to keep making those adjustments across the rest of it. And the more water you add, the more risk you have of overworking your paper. And I can see in that right top of the door, it's starting to feel that way. So I'm moving away from it and trying to work on another area so that I don't disrupt the cotton fibers. Because you can always let it dry and then come back and build on it from there. So just be aware of, you know, what you're doing to the paper and have you gone too far. So again, I'm building up those dark areas on the stairway because I've darkened the doorway, and so now I need more contrast on the steps. And now I feel like it was a little flat, even though I had done a test palette, so I wanted to amp it up a little bit. So I'm adding some Aussie Red Gold here to get a little richness, and I didn't want to just throw it on the stairs and nowhere else, so I'm trying to integrate it at the top of the doorway just for more continuity. Even though the light isn't turned on, I want to make sure that there's a little more warmth in there. And then I'm adding lavender now to cool off some of the shadows. Again, for some of that color harmony across the layout, I felt like it was lacking. I had gone in so heavy on the wall lavender, I wanted to add some of that coolness to the areas within the shadow. And you know, you can do as much planning as you want, but sometimes when you're actually in the thick of it, you do have to make these on the fly adjustments. And so now I'm just adding kind of those final details. I'm feeling like, okay, I have the depth pretty well illustrated. So now I'm trying to just pick a few areas that I can sharpen up for a little more contrast to make things pop and again to reinforce the structure. And really stepping back and looking at the reference photo and your image, that's when you can identify what are those final steps. I could see that I really didn't capture the angle of the wall there. So by being able to go back in and glaze on top, it allowed me to better define that. So if you stuck it out through the end, thank you. I really appreciate you. I hope you could take away some lessons about building value and having patience in your painting. Until next time.